Hi, I'm Femi Oke. What caused anti-government sentiment to flare up in Iran? 1 week after protesters called for an end to high prices and in some cases the removal of Iran's clerical elite, hundreds rallied this weekend in support of the nation's leadership. So what do these demonstrations tell us about what's happening in the country? That's today on The Stream. We're live on Al Jazeera and YouTube.
I'm Sajjad Ashraf, adjunct professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, National University of Singapore. I'm in The Stream.
Some argue the recent uprising in Iran was fueled by President Hassan Rouhani's economic policies. Now, this video highlights the economic grievances of some Iranians, but its authenticity has been clouded by reports the production was backed by Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps and released just days after protests erupted. Reza Mirashi of the National Iranian American Council tweeted, "Facts matter. With little data and verifiable evidence, how do we even know that Iranians believe based on slogans chanted in protests?" Mohsen Milani says, "I am skeptical of those who have more answers than questions about the Iran protests." Others noted the irony of US President Donald Trump tweeting his support for the protesters. His administration's travel ban prevents most Iranians from entering the US. The protests also drummed up support from leaders who could capitalize on the anti-government sentiment, like the last heir to the Iranian monarchy, Reza Pahlavi.
So what my message to the outside world is, don't let the Iranian people down yet again. Don't make the same mistakes as some administration before have done. Today the people are risking their lives, but what they want is to know that this time their voices have been heard.
And the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, who some say leads a controversial Iranian cult, shared a video praising the protesters. Activist Linda Sarsour wrote in a Facebook post, "We must also remember as we watch what's unfolding on social media and TV that Iranians are not a monolith." So, what's really fueling the protests in Iran? With hundreds arrested, more than 20 killed, and a leaderless movement, do we know what's behind the recent unrest? Here with us to discuss in Iran, Hamid Mousavi is a professor of political science at the University of Tehran. On set, we have Hussein Darakhshan, he's a media analyst, and also Nagar Murtazavi is a journalist and commentator who will also be bringing us perspective from Farsi speakers online. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. So much talk about what actually happened in the last 2 weeks, Nagar. If you could sum it up, what happened in Iran?
Well, these protests didn't come out of the blue. Economic protests against austerity measures have been going on for months, if not years. People have been gathering here and there in front of government buildings, and they were scattered, they were smaller, sometimes even cracked down. But this time it was organized, and it all started in the religious city of Mashhad, which is the second largest city in Iran. And like you said, reformist activists on the ground believe that this was actually started by the hardliners or the conservative, who's at the base for one of the major contenders of their in the previous election against President Rouhani is actually in Mashhad, but then it escalated, it got out of hand, and it spread like wildfire to dozens of cities across Iran.
I've got here a tweet from Syed Mousavi, professor. Let me just share this with you. Syed says, because of all the different camps, the dynamics are very vague. These protests don't even have a non-official personality as a leader. The protest directions are sent through Telegram app. A crowd shows up, no manifesto, no clear message. Riots emerge, and then everyone goes back home. Professor, how did you see what happened in the last couple of weeks?
Well, I would agree that it started with economic grievances. Now, I think whether the hardliners were involved in organizing these protests, I think the question is still open. We really don't know. But nevertheless, people have real economic grievances. The official unemployment rate in Iran is around 12%. But when you study the details, the unemployment rate for people aged 15 to 29 is actually over 26%. And this is the official rate. Perhaps it's even higher than this. And as you can imagine, young people without jobs are unhappy, regardless of this whole issue of hardliners and reformers. And we have to consider the fact that Hassan Rouhani came into power 5 years ago on a mandate to improve the economy via a nuclear deal with the West. Now, he was successful in getting the nuclear deal, and the economy has arguably improved slightly, but we haven't really experienced the kind of improvement people were hoping for. So I think there are real grievances regarding the presidency right now.
Hussein, what just happened from your perspective?
Well, I actually think it had three phases. The first phase was organized by hardliners who actually were defeated a few months ago in the last presidential elections from Rouhani. And actually, interestingly enough, they were running on a very, very serious platform of economic, grievances and injustice and unemployment, and they lost in a landslide. So those same people who probably have longer term plans, and they have different things that maybe we'll get into, they organized these protests because they wanted to put pressure on Rouhani for different reasons that we might actually get into later. And then
you keep teasing us. We'll get into this later.
Yeah,
feel free to deep dive anytime you want to. All right. So
the second phase was when some people, very young people, unemployed men, dominated by men, and this is a very important point to make, came to the streets and joined these organized protests that were organized by hardliners, a specific group of hardliners who were close to the candidate who lost the elections in Mashhad. Ibrahim Raisi is his name. And then the third phase was when it became violent, and I think it was a result of probably media support by hawks, US hawks, who have always thought of regime change as the best scenario for Iran. So we have to analyze this in three phases, and we can't really make any judgments as a whole.
Certain amount of opportunism then seems to be going on. It's like, oh, people are out in the streets, maybe we can join them.
Yeah, they always have that.
Yeah.
That, but also we should never forget that the grievances are genuine, like the professor was saying, and it's not just economic. These slogans are now very political. They're targeting the entire establishment. It started by death to Rouhani chants in Mashhad. It went all the way up to the supreme leader, death to dictator, which is another code for supreme leader, who's seen as the symbol of the mismanagement in the political and economic situation of the system, not just in this administration, over decades. And this is something that people feel angry about and now have a platform to vent it out.
Professor, you are professor at the University of Tehran. Go ahead.
If I can add to that,
Please.
I think we should really distinguish between the protesters and the rioters. When the protesters first started about 10 days ago in Mashhad, for the first few days they were very, very peaceful. And I think there was a lot of normal people involved, regardless of, if the conservatives were involved or not. But after a while, we had some sort of riots in especially smaller cities, the burning of banks, the looting of shops, the attempt to take over a police station. And this is the time when the number of protesters started to decline because of the violence, and at the same time, the number of casualties started to increase. And perhaps I think because of that violence, that was one of the reasons why the protests died away. Otherwise, I think if they had been peaceful, then they would have perhaps continued.
Interesting here. Hamid here on Twitter says, I'd separate protests from unrest, which is exactly what the professor says. But Hussein, what do you want to add?
Yeah, the difference between this time and 2009 was that the middle class didn't join this protest. And this is a huge aspect of the dynamic here. Because, and actually it's another sign that I don't think it was about economy. I mean, people have problems, but this specific protests were not about, was not an organic protest about economy. To what I was, postponing was that this protest was organized by a group of hardliners who want to secure the succession to Ayatollah Khamenei as the supreme leader. Rouhani now has a high chance of being the successor to him, especially now that another senior Ayatollah has been apparently diagnosed as having cancer this rumored. So now even, I mean, since last year, before the elections, that was the concern, because they knew that this would probably be happening soon. The establishment should decide about the successor to Ayatollah Khamenei. So they groomed their candidate, Ibrahim Raisi, not only for another 4 years of presidency, but actually for a few decades of supreme leadership. So with Rouhani's victory, these plans were shattered, and so now they're trying to do other things to bring down Rouhani and to take the possibility of the succession to Ayatollah Khamenei from him.
Let's talk about economic reasons potentially for why people would be miserable in Iran. Have a look at these vox pops, people talking about their standard of living. Have a look.
I'm working, but in this society I'm always stressed about the possibility of getting fired the next day. Always being worried about my job, my family, the security of my family. The main problems people are grappling with are their security, the economy, and their livelihood.
There are some who are poor and cannot make ends meet. What should they do? Life is really difficult. We're tenants. I have a daughter and son, both at school. The high prices really put me under pressure at home.
There are solid grievances right there.
I think so. I think just to add to what Hussein was saying, the hard line is to push that all of these economic grievances have to do with the presidency of Hassan Rouhani, which is not true. Many of them are holdovers from the previous administration. There's high level of corruption, there's inequality, there's even environmental factors that have led, wrong environmental policies that have led to grievances. There's serious air pollution in some of the cities where you see the unrest to the level that people can't leave their houses on certain days for health reasons. There's shortage of water, there's drought. So there's a mishmash of all kinds of these policies that people are upset, but at the end of the day, it is their livelihood and the everyday situation of the economy that has made them most angry.
You also have the ability to tap into what people are saying on social media, various different networks. And when you're looking at what reformists are talking about right now, what are you seeing?
I actually had a couple of comments. I talked to an Iranian journalist, a reformist journalist, Rayhana Tabatabai in Tehran, and she had two main points. One is that the dissent has always been going on, but along with what Hussein was saying, it's usually not violent. That's when you see the majority. That's when you see the millions. That's when you see the 2009 type of movement happening. People participate in election to show a form of dissent. They vote for someone like Hassan Rouhani, who's the furthest from the supreme leader, to show their dissent, but in a peaceful manner without risking their lives. The other point she was making was about the reaction of the Trump administration. She was saying that this administration is trying to use sanctions to weaken the central government in Iran. Sanctions are not going to bring democracy. Look at the countries around Iran in the region where the U.S. has invaded and has somehow meddled in, and this is not the situation that the Iranians would want to be in, especially the middle class or the political elite that have kind of stayed away from the streets in these protests.
What kind of pressure do you feel that these recent protests have put on the government in Iran? Here, let me just share this quote from you here. With protests initially emerging from the middle and the lower class Iranians, government is now under a serious demand for reforming economic policies, creating job opportunities, reforming banking systems, etc. Should the government ignore these demands, people will lose trust in Rouhani more than ever.
No, of course not. But we have to be aware that these are the heritage of two things: the previous very corrupt government of Ahmadinejad in 8 years, and then the fact that US hawks are preventing Iran from benefiting from the opening that the nuclear agreement was supposed to bring about. So the economy, I mean, the foreign investment has not happened as much as everybody expected for that reason. So then we get into a very interesting tacit alliance between the US hawks and Iran hardliners when it comes to nuclear deal, because both sides want to get rid of it for their own benefits. And they also are against Rouhani or any kind of moderate or reformist, because obviously they have another interest because of their plans and their larger goals for Iran. The Americans want regime change, the Iranian hardliners want a very isolated, closed militarist society. So then the same groups of people, they do two kinds of exaggerations. They exaggerate about two things. One is the impact of social media and Telegram in inciting violence and in organizing the protest, which is an interesting topic, especially for this program. Sure. And then the economy, they also exaggerate about the impact of the economy because the Iranian hardliners want to bash Rouhani for that, with that excuse. And then Trump and the US hawks want to get rid of the nuclear program because of that.
And also foreign policy, that's what the U.S. hawks are focusing on, and Iran's support for outside groups instead of spending the money on internal issues.
Professor, have you noticed any change since the protesters hit the streets in terms of how the government is reacting to the protests?
Yes, so there has been some changes. I should point out that one of the reasons perhaps there was a little bit of concern and it resulted in the protest to begin with is that the government of Rouhani is trying to form its budget for next year. And there was a lot of discussion regarding increasing gas prices by 50%. Now, that sort of an increase would have effects on all sorts of prices. And they have actually backed away from that proposal. And the discussion right now is maybe to increase it by only 10 to 15%. And also, one other interesting thing that the Rouhani government did a few days ago is they have actually banned the import of cars worth over $40,000 to Iran. So it will no longer be able to import Mercedeses and BMWs and all that. And I think this is partly because of they don't want this sort of economic gap to, for the poorer classes to feel pressured and to become angry. Also, I would, regarding the previous discussion, if I may add, that it is very true that the Rouhani government has had actually some successes. For example, when Rouhani came into office, the inflation rate was about 40%, and right now it's about 10%. Nevertheless, I think the expectation of the nuclear deal was much higher in Iran. People were expecting the economy to improve significantly. And one of the mechanisms for that was the attraction of foreign direct investment. In reality, especially in the past year during the administration of Donald Trump, this kind of investment, especially from the Europeans, has dried up because people become concerned about what the future of Iran-US relations will be, and as a result, they will not invest in Iran, resulting in a degradation of the economy, basically. So I think the Americans are actually partly responsible for this mess to begin with.
Nagar?
I think the Americans are responsible, the promises of the nuclear deal, these are all issues. But also another point about the budget. This budget has been one of the most transparent budgets put out by the administration. And what people see is these foundations, organizations, institutions, religious entities that don't answer to the elected government, that have high budgets, whether it be cultural, social, like I said, religious, or even economic, and they soak up parts of the finances of the country without being part of the administration or the elected body, and basically directly respond to the supreme leader. That's also something that makes people angry, together with the foreign policy, with the presidency and everything. It's like I said, a mix of all these policies, and everybody in the establishment is seen responsible from the viewpoint of the protesters.
It's interesting, we saw at the very top of the show, Reza Pahlavi, he's the son of the former Shah of Iran. He talked just a few days ago about Iranian authorities not really caring about the people of Iran. Have a listen.
The core issue is the dismal economic situation that forces people to voice out their anger. But it's beyond that now. It's going to a point of knowing that the reason why you are in such a mess is because of a total, not only mismanagement of the system, but its basic non-care for the people.
So this brings me to some of the student activists who were imprisoned. Omid shares this tweet here, talking about the dozens of activists who were imprisoned, some of their names as well. Let me just scroll down so you can see them. And then, Nagar, you shared with me a tweet from a member of parliament. So here it is in the Farsi, and then we translated it. Tell us more about that and why you wanted to share that with us.
Sure. So this is Mashhad. He's a reformist member of parliament from Tehran. He's been very vocal, not just around these protests, but even before that, as far as people's grievances. And he has confirmed that one of the protesters who was arrested has died in Evin prison. Now, the reasons are still unclear. Some point to suicide, but he basically is urging or alerting the president and system to prevent another Kahrizak, which is the prison in 2009 where some of the protesters were arrested and then they died in their custody.
I think one very important aspect to this is that the middle class, the urban middle class in Iran, is not economically that bad in terms of conditions yet. That they would, that would bring them into the streets. Mm-hmm. What they care more about is accountability and personal, social, cultural freedoms. And unless there is a huge radical violation of these things in a very abrupt way, I don't think the urban middle class would become, provoked as some other people were in this recent protests. Mm. And this is what is the core of the problem of the Islamic Republic now, which is very systematic violations of personal, social, cultural freedoms, which is really, I think, reaching to a boiling point. So this recent protest was, I hope that it would be a warning for the rulers of Iran to realize that if next time, if the middle class patience is over, then nothing and no one can stop them.
Interesting. Guess what's really clear from this conversation is that there are so many reasons for the people of Iran to want better from their leadership. Many, many reasons, not just one, not just about reform, not just about economics, pollution you even mentioned, post-earthquake recovery. And then on top of all of that, international players come into the mix as well. I'm sure you've seen this from President Donald Trump. Such respect for the people of Iran as they try to take back their corrupt government. You will see great support for the United States at the appropriate time. Professor, what do you make of that?
I would say that Donald Trump's support for the protesters is actually very ridiculous, to be honest with you. He recently called the Iranian nation, and I should emphasize nation and not just the state, a terrorist nation. Perhaps something that made people in Iran actually more angry is that he called the Persian Gulf the Arabian Gulf. And I mean, he has been trying to sanction the country during the past year relentlessly. So to come out and say that he supports the protesters is, I would say, ridiculous. But I would say I don't think the protesters really care about Donald Trump that much. I mean, we've even heard calls of support from a person like Benjamin Netanyahu. And I know that, everyone knows that Iran-Israel relations are terrible. But I think those kind of supports actually hurt the protesters because it creates an image of these protesters being organized or perhaps supported by the enemies of Iran. And I mean, Donald Trump is not a very popular person, even in the United States. So you can imagine how popular he is in Iran. And I don't think those are genuine supports.
So we have the anniversary of the Iranian Revolution coming up. Is that another point where people may well take to the streets? Hussein?
I don't think so, because the middle class should get involved in any kind of next massive protest, and they're not that unhappy.
Nagar?
Pro-establishment will definitely be on the street, but I think middle class has just 6 months ago showed their dissent by participating in election. I just wanted to add to the Donald Trump point, the travel ban, which is severely impacting Iranians, and also the fact that he's against a nuclear deal, which was very popular in Iran.
All right, guests, thank you so much for adding complexity to something that seemed quite simple when you watched the international headlines, but digging deeper, there's so much more. So thank you to Hussein, Nagar, Professor. Really appreciate your insight and your analysis today. Our conversation continues always online. Use the hashtag AJStream. See you soon.